Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Kevin Forbes. I'm with Conduct. I'll be joined shortly by Ryan Smyth, one of my colleagues, for today's presentation. This is part one of a three-part series that we're going through around implementing sports technology. We're basically leveraging some of our knowledge from the work that we've done in the field with elite performance organizations around the world, and helping provide some guidance of things to consider when it comes to bringing sport technology into your environment. So for today's session, we'll be looking at framing your problem, where to start, and what sort of things you should start thinking about before you make the purchase. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Demio platform, this platform will offer the opportunity for you to ask questions. On the right hand side, you'll see the chat. The chat is set up in a private fashion. So what that means is when you ask your questions, they will only be viewable by us, the presenters, and we'll answer those whether throughout the session or we do have some time at the end. Actually, that's a great point. Today's session is scheduled for roughly 45 minutes. We're giving about 30 minutes for our presentation, and then we'll save about 15 minutes at the end for questions. Also, throughout the session, on that right-hand side, you'll see some options come up as we go through the presentation for polls. Just some quick questions to get a better feel from the audience on different things. So please feel free to answer those poll questions as you move through, and we'll try to tailor some of our presentation towards who we have out in the audience. Finally, the session itself is being recorded. So if you do have to drop halfway through, or if you want to review at a later point, you'll get an email after the session with the recording attached, and you can review at your leisure. So without further ado, would like to welcome Ryan Smyth, Senior Sport Technologist for Conduct, up to the stage.
Thanks, Forbes. I appreciate it.
Hey, Ryan, how are you?
I'm good. You?
Good. So Ryan, maybe just before we get too started or too in depth, maybe if you want to just share a little bit about yourself.
Oh, yeah. So as a senior sports technologist at Conduct, basically my role here is to help clients understand the role that technology places in their work environment. So understanding, given their budget, what available technologies are out there and how to implement them with their teams, and then on a day-to-day basis, help them either troubleshoot or work with their data sets to help them discover insights to help them progress in their high performance environment. So I came from the NHL with the Anaheim Ducks before I joined Conduct. Since I've joined Conduct, outside of doing what I just talked about in terms of implementing sports technology, I also oversee sport testing and combines here at Conduct, where I've tested over 100,000 people from around the world, including Japan, North America, and Australia. And looking forward to this conversation. So maybe, Forbes, you want to do the same. Give a little bit of background on yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. So as an innovation manager with Conduct, I've I kind of feel like I've just kind of been around long enough to be part of the furniture, but I've been with Conduct for almost 9 years now, and so really my role today is sort of I guess feed in two different ponds on both the business side and the technology side. So working very closely with folks on our business development team as well as on our product team to explore and define, whether it's entries into new markets or, looking at new solutions that we might be delivering to market for our existing clients. So that, that's kind of a culmination of a lot of work that I've done over my time with Conduct. That's seen me kind of in the weight rooms and the locker rooms of, the majority of our high profile clients, and kind of everyone's sort of a high profile client, I guess, when it gets down to it. So, I've been able to, have some great contacts in industry, and that's where this topic kind of becomes front of mind. Is you end up getting into, and I know Ryan, you can probably agree with me here. You get into basically a position where you become almost like a trusted resource of folks working in high performance teams, and they almost be able to view you as a peer to ask your advice and suggestions on things they should be considering when it comes to augmenting their protocols and their programming. So maybe actually let's dive right in, and our first sort of topic or theme to go about is actually those types of people that we work with, and we've sort of laid out some different personas here about different types of people or the different scenarios that people will find them in when it comes to purchasing sport tech. But Ryan, do you want to take us through these?
Yeah, sounds good. So pretty much what we're trying to do during these webinars is it basically describe like the challenges, right? So this is one of three. What we're looking to look at is like, okay, first one is how do we implement technology? So different scenarios that we've seen with our clients or anyone who's either new to the world of high performance and professional sports, or if they've just got a job that came from a gym or like a high performance area that didn't have the sort of budget that maybe a high performance like professional team would have, is like looking at it. Okay, I'm coming on board. I have a new opportunity, and I have no spectrum of technology on site. So what am I doing? I need to start from scratch. I need to understand what my end goal is, what's my hypothesis, and what technology can help me sort of define what my daily sort of requirements are, and then what do I want to grab long term. Finally, secondly, we look at like, I got a new position, really excited about it. I'm coming on board with this new team. I can't wait to get started. And hey, there's some technology there that um, you know I've never used before. I maybe I've used a heart rate monitor, but the heart rate monitor that's on site is not something I'm used to, or it's a force plate, or it's a VBT unit. And so basically looking to work within the scope of what you have, and then try to bring in things that are complementary that's already there. So things that you're used to using. And then I think finally it's like, okay, coming on board, you have additional budget, you want to do some stuff, you've heard some good things about certain technologies, and say, okay, now I want to sort of like augment the technology that I have, and then work within sort of a bigger budget to say, hey, I got actually budget to buy things that I've always wanted to buy, and create sort of a new data set for myself that I can learn from. So I think that's sort of the sort of the three components. And then Forbes, I don't know if you have any more insight than I just gave, but I think those are the three components that we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, something that you mentioned really is it all kind of comes down to comfort level. I mean, obviously, I think in this day and age, with the explosion and propagation of sport technology in this space, from when we talk about high performance, or even getting into some of the amateur or youth or weekend warrior type scenarios, like it's not to say that we haven't been exposed to this, or anyone hasn't been exposed to this, but it is a case of you might end up being in scenarios with with things that you're inheriting that you may not be fully comfortable with, or maybe you already have have some things in place that you've chosen or built up over your time, but are also kind of now looking to augment that with others. Actually, just to maybe call out, we have dropped our first poll in place. Very early days, but have four answers in place around kind of who we have out there in the audience. And so in this case, we have some folks that are in a position where they've started maybe a new position, or maybe been there for a while, but are in that position of inheriting technology, and they might be looking to either replace or bring in complementary pieces. And others that maybe have been in a role for a period of time, and now are looking to add on additional data sources. So it's I think both of those ones we'll reference as we continue to go through the presentation. Of different things to consider in both those scenarios. So actually, let's keep moving forward here, Ryan.
Please.
And so now I think really becomes the case of those key questions that you start to ask yourself about really any type of technical implementation. And I mean, at least I know for myself, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but both of us, coming a bit from a technical background ourselves, like this isn't necessarily just solely for sports technology. Really, it's from kind of like that whole process of any type of technical implementation and change management. But the key questions you start to ask yourself, almost like the who, what, where, when, and why. Ryan, maybe you want to go through these questions a bit, and we'll add in some flavor as we go through.
Let's add some flavor. So basically, we're looking at, okay, how do we use the technology? So basically, how are we trying to measure things? If we talk about a VBT, which is velocity based training. So multiple sort of things out there. So it's maybe it's a gym wear with an angled sensor. Is it a IMU? Is it a camera based solution that you want to collect that? So all different kinds of sort of solutions for each one of your problems. So that's why it goes back to that first part. What's your hypothesis in terms of like, hey, what are we looking for in terms of the end result, and then how do I want to implement that to sort of get compliance, get accuracy, get usability with inside of that, and then how do we go from there? So what are we looking to measure, right? So understanding my end goal, am I looking for daily measurements? Am I looking for chronic or acute sort of measurements? Am I looking for long-term sort of development measurements? I think that's really the key question you need to ask yourself. After that, you're sort of asking, we talk, and this is in order, of course, like, how do you plan on using it, right? So as we get through, it's like, okay, I have a certain budget. I need to plan to do this. Maybe I don't even have an assistant, so it's only myself. I want to be able to collect information. But what's the easiest implementation where I have a certain budget, I want to collect this certain thing, but I need sort of assistance for my players to be able to have them put it on themselves, or have them measure themselves, because I think ultimately when it comes to budget and staffing, it sort of goes hand in hand, right? It's great to have an additional budget to buy sports tech, but if it doesn't help you in the day sort of resolve your sort of time management, it's not worth any of your budget. And then finally, how do we action on it? So we want to buy technology. Let's say we want to look at physiological stuff, and we have a heart rate monitor, and we're going to plan on using it, right? We have to charge it at the end of the practice. We have to turn it on pre-practice or pre-game. And then how do we action upon it? We hope that compliance is high, so there's making sure that there's trust within you to explain the data post and capture. And then how do we sort of use that information to sort of help our day-to-day or month to week or week to week or month to month implementation of data, and how do we sort of create actions upon that to say, give feedback to not only to your athletes, because that's first and foremost. If you don't have compliance and trust of your athletes, then they won't wear it. And then finally, how do we give that data set now to your management team, your coaching staff, so that they can sort of work alongside you? So it's sort of a team environment that sort of allows you to sort of implement something that is usable for them. Ultimately, remember, at the end of the day, it's all about tactical performance. It's great to be able to collect a lot of information, but if you can't understand how it affects them tactically, a lot of coaches may not sort of understand what you're trying to implement. So it's one thing to say they need a day off, but if you don't have that data to say, hey, they need to have a day off because I'm noticing that on game days where their load value is a certain amount, they don't perform as well. If we can lower that load amount the day before, they perform at a 30% better. Coaches can normally understand that pretty easily and then implement it a little bit easier. But Forbes, happy to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the main things to point out here is like, and we're almost starting to talk about things without getting into the actual technology solutions. And I think when we start about, starting with the end in mind, it's important to kind of separate that from saying, oh, I need, I need GPS belts, or I need a heart rate monitor, or I need VBT. It's a bit more of, hey, this is the type of information that I'm looking to capture. This is the type of context on my athlete that I'm looking to measure, and then being able to kind of look at it from there. Of, all right, like, I think feasibly I want to do that on a daily basis, or I want to do that on a weekly basis, or that's only something that we're going to be doing at the beginning and the end of a competitive season, and so on. And then this is how I'm going to utilize that information. That could, theoretically, we're kind of, when we separate it from an actual technical solution, you're really kind of getting into a bit more of a holistic conversation of, hey, I want to be able to do whatever it is, a movement screen at the beginning and the end of a competitive session, and then that's going to affect how I'm going to deliver programming through that time. Or to your example around load management, I want a way to be able to quantify the exertion of my athletes, whether it's in practice and training, or potentially in competition as well. And then I want to be able to utilize that to ensure that we're not overloading them, to have more positive conversations with coaching staff around athlete usage, and to ensure that, like, again, we're getting into spots where as much as we can, we're mitigating injury risk, or at least ensuring that athletes are not overly fatigued and able to perform at peak efficiency. And so, like, those things really are very much divorced from saying heart rate, or saying GPS, or saying LPS, or saying RFID, or RPE, or anything like that. Throw out a lot of anagrams, I guess, but acronyms. It is just more, hey, these are the things to start to think about before you really start to I think funnel yourself towards a particular solution. And that, some of the things you mentioned there around even just the usage of and how you might implement it really kind of brings us up to our next point around just that overall practicality and compliance. And so this one is really, I think in the technical space we call it change management, but it is really kind of that whole sort of concept of really kind of thinking about how your organization, in this case, obviously focusing potentially on the athlete, because often when we think about sport technology, we're measuring the athlete, and that might be something that we're strapping onto an athlete or asking an athlete to utilize on a regular basis. But how do we ensure that that their participation occurs, and how do we how do we kind of embrace them in that process of change?
Yeah. So the way we look at this, basically, it's like, okay, so um, the way I look at it, when I try to implement any technology, be that in my own sort of environment or I'm working with a client, it's like I'm a big component of multi sort of verse sort of technology. So obviously a heart rate or a GPS or LPS or RFID is sort of dimensional in terms of how you're capturing that information. It's heart rate, it's HRV, it's Excel, DXL, distance traveled, velocity zones. That's sort of what you're going to get from that, and you can pull some tactical information off that as well. But ultimately, I like versatility. So, and form factors are a real key issue. So, if you realize that people don't like wearables, so then how do we get away from wearables to collect usable, accurate information that elevates compliance? So I'm a big component of having accurate information. I think that's a really sort of key component because I want to standardize my data set so I can make decisions off standardized of data. But ultimately, like, it's if the best sort of accurate information you can grab is something that takes them 20 minutes to put on. The compliance level is going to go way down, and it doesn't matter if it's the most accurate thing in the world. It's not usable in a sort of environment of like a high performance team. So the way I look at it is like practicality, consider the form factor, consider that you want to standardize your data sets as much as possible so there's not a lot of fluctuation there. And then you want to get into, okay, what's the trade-off between giving positive and reinforcing data sets to not only your athletes but to your coaching staffs, and then making sure that the compliance level is higher. And that really stems back to what I was saying earlier, is getting that trust of your athletes. So you're going to collect information on athletes. In my case, I would look at a uh, multi sort of purpose tool, even like a force plate. When people look at it just as using it as a jump measurement tool or readiness tool, you can use it as a rehabilitation tool. You can look at it as, if it's a dual plate left or right measurements, you can look at it as a push-up tool. Like, basically, if you get inventive with your minds and create sort of that environment with your athletes to give feedback, tools that can sort of be multiverse, accurate, and then allows you for not only necessarily instant feedback, but give like positive feedback and feedback that can be used more readily and easily to digest for the athletes. Because you remember, they don't have the degrees in kinesiology and biomechanics for them to understand it. I mean, they're going to look at jump height and be like, well, I jumped 3 inches higher. It doesn't matter if my breaking RFD is low, right? So understanding that that's sort of the environment that we're in, and making sure that the compliance is high, and that's twofold in my opinion. It's trust within you that you're going to give the data back to them in an usable, easily digestible manner, and that the form factor is easy to wear. Because a lot of high performance athletes, doesn't matter if it's women or male, they want to feel comfortable. They're used to wearing their equipment they're used to wearing. They don't necessarily want big bulky wearables on them all the time. Some people are okay with it, and other people aren't. So, Forbes, happy to hear what your thoughts are on that. But that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, one of those things, definitely is a bit of foreshadowing towards, one of our forthcoming sessions in this three-part series, where we will be talking a bit more about, that delivery, where after we collect information, knowing that it can't just go into a silo, it can't be just hidden away in your office. Part of that action is providing, the delivery and insight and visibility of that data, both up to management, to coaches, and so on, but also down to the athlete as well, so they have an understanding of why this is important, and why are we measuring this, and what we're doing. I think one thing to call out here, and this kind of feeds into the next poll question that we did drop in there around the primary considerations for folks when it comes to implementing sports technology. It's Ryan. It sounds like you lean a bit more towards obviously the accuracy of the technology, but this is where I think that trade off, and going back to our previous slide that we were talking about from a standpoint of how often we might be using a particular type of technology, and so knowing to use one of the examples I gave on the previous slide of if it is a case where maybe we're doing a biomechanics screen and we're using some technology that requires quite a bit of calibration and it has multiple sensors strapped all over an athlete and things like that, but we might only be doing that once or twice a year. That that accuracy of that device might be extremely high. The burden for an athlete might also be extremely high, but overall that that could be that's the assessment that you as a performance coach needs to make in terms of is that that trade off all worth it from a standpoint of okay, we're only going to need to do this say at the beginning of the season, at the end of the season, and the rest of the time maybe we're using something that's a little bit less burdensome, or maybe we're just using those two kind of milestone assessment points to to plan out whether it's corrective exercise or anything else that we're going to be kind of basing that information off of. And so that's where I think it becomes a bit of a trade off for sure. And knowing that there are obviously varying levels of accuracy, and not necessarily saying that the the less accurate technology is the ones that are easier to use, but it is a case of these are all things that you really need to start to consider as you kind of make any sort of assessment prior to the purchase.
Yeah, and I think another thing to call out, and we can go to the next slide too, Corey, but I think it's also important to call out these technologies that we're looking to implement should be not only for yourself to utilize, but like let's say you're working with a PT or an AT. How does that information help them in their jobs? Because ultimately you're trying to create a high performance team, not a high performance individual, right? By giving back to those around you with the technology you're able to collect, you can you talk about rehab, return to play protocols. So using that tech to sort of get you back to like baseline areas to work with, ATs and PTs to discover sort of insights in terms of like deficiencies before injuries occur. I mean, there's multiple ways of using technologies to sort of evolve this sort of like team environment that helps you with that practicality. And sometimes, we talk about cost and practicality. It's also the budget, right? So if you're able to work within everyone sees that force plate is good for a PT, an AT, and the strength coach, the likability of you getting a force plate is higher because now everyone sees that as a sort of I can use that to do this and I can use that to do that. And that becomes into that cost and practicality of getting something that's usable across the board.
And actually, to that cost point, 43% of folks responding to our poll there on the primary consideration saying cost is their primary consideration. One of the things actually to point out is it's not just the number on the invoice that you need to be aware of. I mean, there are some hidden costs that are a bit maybe uh, less on the forefront, or maybe not necessarily coming out of the wallet that we also need to be aware of. Ryan, do you want to maybe overview some of these things?
Yeah. So we look at it like, okay, a good prime example. So we talk about buying, a GPS or a heart rate monitor. So GPS, if for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you do, it's outdoor. So outdoor would be a GPS sensor, indoor would be an LPS or RFID that could also be used outdoors. But ultimately, okay, so you buy that sort of heart rate, a GPS sensor, and then you want to sort of embed it into your environment, which is great. But maybe you're a single sort of strength coach or high performance director or PT, and you have no additional staff. So we talk about man hours. Like at the end of the day, you have to download the data if it doesn't get automatically pulled. Then you have to charge those units. Before practice, before games, before sessions, you have to put it into the athlete's locker or find them to give it to them by hand and to make sure they have it on properly. So there's hours and time allotted to sort of just literally getting them to wear a wearable, right? So understanding that sort of man hour of usage. And then, okay, now we're collecting that information. How do we interpret it? So there's that sort of like decision tree in terms of like I'm collecting information now. How do I dictate that and help them, fit in terms of my structure? Because I might be having to build programming for the next day. May need to give hydration skills to my coach to say these people are a little bit fatigued because you need to give them a readiness skill. So understanding your use cases, understanding how to interpret the data, it's also another avenue in terms of like we're calling them a hidden cost, but it's basically the man hours that you're going to use post collecting information to make detailed decisions. Now, the other thing we talk about is, and it's not a hidden cost necessarily, but I know that it's been a topic within strength coaches. Like, okay, I bought my gear, but I'm also paying a subsistent cost. So I'm paying for an additional like SaaS model, and SaaS is like a software for service. So I'm collecting information. It goes to a cloud. I'm able to look at a report on a cloud. Maybe I'm able to API it into Conduct and AMS that allows me to sort of overlay different data sources to create more insights. So then it becomes okay. Not only do I have a budget for heart rate monitors or GPS, and that I got $10,000 to do that this year. Understanding that next year that fee could be an additional $2,000 or $3,000 the next year. And if you didn't plan for that, understand that there's also that. So understanding the man hours that it takes to just implement getting people to wear technology, to understand that you need to interpret that data post, that it just doesn't do it for you, that you need to sort of have to understand why you're collecting it. So it's great that if Forbes he said, I have this GPS, you should use this GPS because he's used it for years and I all of a sudden implement it, but I don't know why I'm implementing it, but I'm just collecting information. You educate yourself, take time, go through it, ask questions. There's no stupid questions. Go through that and understand, okay, now I've got them wearing it. I'm now analyzing it. And now I need to also budget for next year because that technology that I just purchased is now going to implement another cost the next year. And there's nothing wrong with those costs. I think people need to understand like that's the way that these companies are able to innovate and evolve and get better. But it's also understanding that once you buy that, that's how they sort of keep afloat so that your technology can get better, the software can get better, and you can make better decisions using it. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we have that question: is the payoff worth the cost? Right. So I see here we have 3 people saying, they want to look at load monitoring via GPS or heart rate. I think if that's what you want to go down that route, that's great. But ultimately, understand, end of the day, you need to download the data sets. You need to charge them at the end of the day. You need to be able to give player report cards to your players so that they understand you're not just collecting data and sitting in your office and closing the door. And then ultimately, you're also saying, I need to also use that information to help educate my general manager, my scouting staff, my coaches, so that they can help those players. Because ultimately, if you think about collecting information, it's best if we can collect information and there's a residual outcome from that, right? So it's one saying I collected heart rate or GPS. It's another thing to say I collected that, and look, we saw that you're fatigued. We know that you'd be better off performing tactically better, so we're going to give you the next day off, or it's going to be low volume the next day. If players understand that that's the takeaway from that, and they get some outcomes out of that, that's good for them. Your compliance are going to go higher. They're going to trust that you're collecting information properly, and that sort of like that trust factor that I talked about before goes higher.
Yeah, so many things I want to add into this. I mean, I'm not going to name names or anything like that, but I definitely have had conversations with, with teams, with organizations that, for example, maybe have been, having their guys use GPS on a regular basis, but, they're just like, well, hey, we've been collecting this information for years now. Can you help us interpret it? And it's like, wow, like, you know, what it's amazing that the athletes are still strapping it on if there really hasn't been an outcome on it. But like, it is, kind of goes back to one of our other points there about beginning with that end in mind. One of the other things I wanted to point out, and not necessarily saying that, once you make a purchase that you're kind of railroaded or stuck with them. Wise point you put out up there, Ryan, about, subscription costs and things like that to be aware of, but also just, being aware of that cost of making a change. I mean, we had a few people mention that they've inherited technology as they've kind of maybe adopted a new role and so on, and maybe that might not be the technology that they are comfortable with or would choose themselves. But it is something to be aware of when it comes to even the questions around practicality and accuracy and so on, about how you might want to consider weighing whether or not you should make a change or not. I mean, I often think of just even the example of the NFL Combine, where they went from stopwatches to electric time, but then there's still the people that firmly believe that the stopwatch is the most accurate thing, and they're kind of old school. But in a more maybe technically savvy way, to point out, body composition, knowing there's so many different ways to measure body composition. I mean, starting with something like the calipers, or a device like bod pod that uses compressed air, or a device like InBody that uses the electrical impulse, or electrical impedance. If you're, maybe you're coming into an organization that is using kind of one of those services, and you want to bring in something different, which is totally fine. But keep in mind, what that might do from the data set that has been established. And so, if are you going to be able to utilize the same norms that that have been established from that data that's been collected? Are you going to be able to look at historical data in the same way, knowing that for some of these things, moving from even just one GPS provider to a different GPS provider and so on, the algorithms are different, and so it's not always a one-to-one. And so some of those things may really change how things were done in the past, and that's something you need to factor in. Ideally, you don't want to get into a position where you're throwing out all of the data that has been collected in the past, but you want to find a way to be able to leverage it, but also put it into context of this is our new way going forward, and so on. So knowing that, hey, each device might have its own error range, or might have its own way of coming up with values, whether they be load or something like just like body fat. That also needs to be taken into account. If all of a sudden you change the way that you're measuring body fat, and everybody on your team now is maybe 4% higher than they were under the previous tool.
And just to call out something, so if you're looking at contracts, guys, ultimately, if you want to see, like, there's sometimes they describe it as online or offline. So online really means that, like, it's an online source, that data is going to some type of cloud. Offline means that data source is stored locally on your drive. So basically, the data is localized to your own computer, and then you can manipulate it the way you want. Now, normally an offline product has higher cost values, because basically they're getting their fees off that sort of initial value. So if you're looking at, like, hey, I want to get a heart rate monitor, I can look at X. It's all of a sudden it's 1.5 times higher than another one. Sometimes it's because there's no residual sort of fee post that. It says, because basically that data is staying on your system, and that company is no longer seeing any revenue from you. And so understanding offline and online is important for you to talk about hidden costs, especially when it comes to contracts.
Perfect. Just want to call out again, please drop any questions you might have into the chat. We're kind of getting into that point about talking about conclusions and questions. So we'll just give a second and see if we have any questions pop up there. But yeah, Ryan, maybe while we do wait for questions to pop up, we can kind of do a bit of a preview of, as I mentioned at the beginning there, this is a 3-part series. So what's coming up in our next 2 parts?
Oh, let me tell you, Forbes, I'm totally excited about it. But quite honestly, I think what everyone who's on here have to understand, our next sort of component, we were kind of high level on this one in terms of, like, this is how we would implement it. So what we're trying to describe on this one is, like, you're coming in a new situation, and key questions you should be asking before you implement anything, right? So I'm coming in a situation, and I need to figure out what's next and how to sort of start that sort of voyage. So what's my end goal? What's my hypothesis? How do I collect that? How do I research what's out there? Who's available to talk to, uh, like you and I, to sort of clear out the noise a little bit. And then part 2 is like, okay, we're going into it. We now know what we want to collect, and how we feel like we want to collect it. So now we're going to implement it. And what's great is that basically we're able to talk about how we would select technologies based upon our needs, what the data sources we can pull from those techs, and then that guest appearance we're talking about is a good one. It's a buddy of mine I've known for a long time, Bennett Watson. He's the CEO of Hawker Dynamics, a force plate company out of Maine in the USA, and he's going to talk about his adventures and how he sort of started his own sports tech company out of biomechanics, in terms of where he came from, and then how he sort of sees embedding that sort of technology in this space. And then what his insights are into the space in terms of, you buy a force plate, how do people feel about the usability, and then how they sort of, like, use it practicality wise to go from there.
And then the next one after that, we're going to plan to have these out, every few weeks. But part three, the finale, we kind of previewed that a little bit earlier on in our conversation. So talking about what to do once the data has been analyzed. So whether that is how to feed this into training or action intervention of some sort, but also how to pass that information onto your organization's different decision makers. And I mean, one thing to call it, not on this slide, but knowing that that's not just if you will, putting that information higher up in the organizational hierarchy, but as opposed, it is also ensuring that the athletes are part of that communication, that they have an understanding of why you're collecting data and what you're looking to do with it. So definitely keep an eye on those. By being an attendee of this, we'll make sure that you get an invite to the next couple of sessions, and we hope to see you then. That said, we do have some questions that have popped up in the chat. So Ryan, I'll hit you with some speed rounds here. What is one of the most common mistakes practitioners make when purchasing technology? I have some initial thoughts, but I'll let you take it first.
Quite honestly, I think Jeremy. First of all, thanks for the question and thanks for being here today to listen to Forbes and I ramble on. I I think it's important to understand that I think most times people they'll buy tech without understanding sort of the requirements within inside of it. And I know it sort of hits home on before, but like as I said to Forbes a lot of times, okay, I'm gonna buy heart rate. And this is just an example. I'm gonna buy heart rate sensor. So I'm gonna buy enough just for my team. Normally when you think about like you buy lumber for like building a deck, you buy 10% more, right? Because you never know like what's going to break on a certain time, and you're going to be like, if you only have a certain amount, that's a problem. And then you're like, okay, I want to use like real time data, because a lot of people think real time data is the way to use it. But now it's like, okay, what's the connectivity issue? Because now yeah, I'm an indoor solution, and the range is only a certain amount, so I need to set up some antennas. And sometimes it's outdoors, but like the outdoor, where are you setting up? Do you have time to sit there and monitor it in real time? So I think it's a lot of just like questions about like, okay, what are you expecting out of the product, and then like, are you buying kind of enough of it? And I don't mean you need to be like obtuse if you're buying where you buy too much of it. I'm just saying like, have a few spares, have a few extra batteries, have a place where you're going to store them, where you can charge them. And then ultimately, when you talk about the practicality of using it, how do we sort of like envision using it? What's my purpose? Am I looking at online like live? Am I looking at post analysis? And then understanding, hey, can I pull that data out? Doesn't matter if you're going into a product like Conduct. Ultimately, we would like you to, but ultimately, like, you want to be able to use that information. So is it coming out as a PDF where you now need to manually hand bomb it into an Excel sheet or Google sheet? Understanding how to pull that data out is also sort of something where people are like, "Well, I have a certain budget, and I think I need to collect heart rate, but the heart rate that comes out is only via a PDF." Well, now I'm like, I saved some money, but now my time's being killed because like I'm literally typing in numbers after every practice just to get sort of residual outcomes of it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the first thing that came to mind, and again, don't want to name names or shame people, but I definitely remember, the topic that first comes to mind is trying to do too much too quickly, or trying just to do too much. Um, I remember having a conversation with the performance team where they're like, this year is going to be different. We're going to have the guys jump on a force plate every day. We're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing kind of this version of our movement screen once a week. We're going to be doing every 2 weeks. We're going to grab body comp. We're going to do this every month, and so on and so forth. And then, like, kind of, working with them to, obviously realize how we can, kind of do all that connectivity and bring that all together. And essentially, once the, sort of the grind of the competitive season started, that whole plan really just fell apart within, like, the first, I don't even think they made it through the first month. And part of that is, really kind of trying just to do too much. I mean, I think the phrase they were using was like, yeah, we're going to moneyball human performance. We're going to get everything, we're going to understand everything, like we're going to, make sure that like when we hand the athletes over to the coaches that, anything that, is a detriment from the way that their body moves has been, fully eliminated and understood and stuff like that. And it's just, it is a case of, there are, it's acknowledging that, hey, as being a professional in the human performance space, you're also part of that larger team, and there are other things that are requiring whether it's your attention or your athlete's attention, or just the practicality of how we're going to be able to do this from a time perspective, both pre and post the time that you might be working with an athlete. Like, are you going to be able to? I think Ryan, you pointed out some of these things earlier. Are you going to be able to work with an athlete to if it's not a day where they might be coming into the weight room, or going out on the practice court, or whatever it is, are you going to be able to get them to jump on a force plate? And how are you going to do that? How are you going to staff that? How are you going to ensure compliance? All those different things. So I think that's it's kind of like a case where it's a bit of a pie in the sky kind of thing of like, if you had all the financial resources in the world, would you want your athletes to have everything strapped onto them, or would you kind of almost have to take some half steps there just to ensure that you're getting data that you can use, and getting participation, and getting something that you can base your plan off of.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say too in terms of that too. So, and to Forbes' comment, I struggle with that when I first started doing things, and I'm happy to say that I when I first got into high performance, or sort of like into the NHL, I implemented a ton of stuff, right? And I was I was even on site all the time, and it was a lot. And now eventually I came up with a pattern, I got going, and and I was able to do it. But like, you can overboard. It's great to have all the technology in the world, but if you can't implement it, it's a problem. The other thing I want to really nail home, when you look at it, like common mistakes in terms of like that practicality of things, and how to do it. How does it affect your tactical performance? Because ultimately, that's really what it's about, right? Um, you're collecting information, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's about wins and losses, and how you perform on the field of play that you're in. And so that's another like mistake. So you're going to collect information. Now, maybe the CBA doesn't let you collect information in a game, right? But you think you're going to collect, game information, but like no players wearing it, because you can't ask them to wear it because the CBA says you can't. So understanding your environment that you're in, and then trying to say, okay, I still need tactical information because it's going to help me make decisions at the end of the day. How can I do that, or how can I gain the trust of the athletes that I'm going to use it on their behalf, so that they feel like they'll come to you and say, hey, I want to wear this in the game because I want to know how I'm at, because I know I get positive feedback from you. And I don't mean positive feedback like, way to go today. More like saying, here's what your information showed me, and this is where you can get better, or here's how like we need to make sure you're safe when you're playing these games.
Yeah, Ryan, you caught me. I was definitely trying to subtweet you with everything that I mentioned there about trying to do too much with technology.
That's me.
Um, we have time for one more question. Ryan, let you take the first stab at this one. Where do you think the sport technology space goes next? What do you think is, if you had to, maybe pick some ponies, from a standpoint of
Pick some
like sort of
ponies.
new trends that are coming out, or what you've seen in sport tech? What are the kind of things that that get you excited?
Well, I think pick my ponies might be my next T-shirt purchase. But um, first of all, Brad, I want to thank you again for the questions and joining us today. Sort of the next sort of iteration of sport tech, especially now, is either in embedded sort of technology. So embedded means like, we talk about like, in the pro sports space, it's like embedding sort of RFID tags in jerseys or in shoulder pads, to collect information that is in quote unquote a wearable, but it's basically, it doesn't impede in sort of what the players are actually wearing. And then ultimately to that, it's also using the cameras. So obviously cameras on phones, and cameras with inside like arenas, to collect human performance tactical information, and human performance data like biomechanically breakdowns, using the phone, or using the cameras around the system, that's sort of like low sort of impedance on the human. I mean, there's even devices now that you're able to use a camera to get your heart rate and breathing rate just by using the camera on your phone. So understanding that that's sort of the next wave of things that basically doesn't necessarily take away from a wearable, but it actually enhances sort of like your compliance and the complexity in terms of being able to collect information by simply using a device like an iPad or a phone or an iPhone that allows you to sort of collect that information anywhere in the world, or vice versa, using the cameras that are sort of already used for broadcast to then use that as a sort of a way of collecting XY data that could help you in terms of understanding tactical information that sort of expands into human performance.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, obviously, again, kind of if we think, take that broader view of just technology as a whole, everything is always, trying to become lighter and smaller, and whether it's kind of computers going from being the size of rooms to obviously seeing that we have some folks that are joining us on their phones, which are probably more powerful than those little those computers that were probably larger than this office that I'm in. But that's where I think as a whole, we see technology becoming, for lack of a better term, invisible. It's it's being hidden away. I mean, the camera from a standpoint of XY is a perfect example there. I mean, we see that, in terms of how much that's changed the way that play is done in the NBA, where where the camera systems that are in the rafters of the arenas can really start to track and quantify both obviously some of the things with like the disappearance of the long two and the rise of the three pointers, but also more on the human performance side, identify things like load and distance traveled and accelerations and decelerations and how that has an impact on the human body. One of the other things I'd point out, I know you covered kind of the camera system. Two other ones that kind of really came to mind as soon as you started talking were some of the rise of smart fabric, smart garments, where sensors are woven directly into fabric. So like a performance shirt that might also track heart rate or breathing rate or something like that. And as that becomes a bit more passive, which I think less obtrusive for the athlete. And then as probably as battery life and things like that continue to have advancements, that's going to become even more valuable as we move forward. One of the other things, and I know this is obviously more, it's kind of like that crossover of things in the medical space making the jump. But the skin patches, where they're obviously utilized quite a bit now, and for diabetics with glucose monitoring and things like that, you're getting into being able to monitor other things with kind of those smart patches, and that can cover again everything from biometrics, getting into things like sweat, and from a hydration perspective, there's a lot of stuff that I've seen start to come out that as that becomes more solidified and more productized in the marketplace, I think it's really going to offer a lot more opportunity to gain much more insight on athletes without without hopefully being too cumbersome for them as they perform.
Yeah, and I think a call out there too is it's when you think about it as a practicality, like think about even the consumer marketplace when you talk about what can be collected on just a consumer watch, from an Apple Watch to a Garmin watch to whatever, or even a golf watch to be able to get your swing clean. Or even you think about like what the shoe companies do now, just with the insoles or embedded technology in the shoes, that basically you don't even know, you know that they're there, but they don't impede in terms of like you wearing that technology, and it's just literally like collecting that information without you having to do anything other than what you would normally have done. So I think it's also important to understand that while we try to be innovative in the high performance space, sometimes you can even take initiatives in terms of like, oh, that's interesting that they embedded an insole into an Under Armour shoe as an example, and I was able to collect information off that. Hey, could I use that now into one of my players' shoes, because it doesn't impact in terms of their gameplay, and I can put that on them. And all of a sudden, I'm getting information at the end of the game or end of practice that they didn't even know I was collecting, and I'm able to give them better insight strictly by using something that was low cost value but high impact in terms of just like them actually being compliant and using something that I could use on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Ryan, we are a little bit past time, so apologies for any of you that were watching the clock and had something right at the quarter two mark. But want to thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. We did do a brief overview of part two and part three. Hopefully, you can join us for that. If you do have questions that maybe are a bit more applicable to part two or three, or even just questions that we really weren't able to capture today, please feel free to reach out, info@conduct.com, or send us a message on any of our social media outlets. Again, a recording of this presentation will be dropped in your inbox shortly after we wrap up. But would like to thank you all. Ryan, would you like to?
All right, one last thing, Farbsy.
Yeah.
I apologize, but I think we should call out that we have a handout there And that handout is a PDF of integration partners. So ahead of our next webinar, you want to download that, and then you can take a look at like this is a sample of who we integrate with. But that gives you a good sense of like different sort of technologies that we do talk about and we do work with that we have sort of some insight on, and we'll be touching on some of those next time.
Perfect. So thank you all once again. This was Implementing Sports Technology, Part 1, Framing Your Problem. And we look forward to seeing you for Part 2. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. We should have an outro music. That'd be good.
I wish we did. Yeah.